States government ever second guess or say no to Israel?
Second guess, yes. No, unlikely. But I don't think we have ever confronted the kind of leadership in Israel that we see today. I mean, I'm sure you can go back and find presidents and prime ministers and others who were put off by the arrogance of some Israeli prime ministers from time to time and over the last 50 years. But this is different. This is hubris on a scale that it's hard to imagine. And when you are a victim of your own hubris, which is the case with Netanyahu, it distorts reality. It sabotages your ability to carefully analyze. You sort of lose touch with reality. And I think there's an understanding that that's happened, but there's nothing that anybody in Washington can do to stop it. They all live in fear of the Israeli lobby.
So in the past 2 weeks, the following words and images have come about in Israel. 2 assassinations, horrific torture, civilians breaking into a military prison to extricate the torturers, decisions by the Justice Department not to prosecute the torturers, IDF grunts begging their superiors to beg civilian leadership not to send them into Hezbollah because they're exhausted. The recognition in the West that the IDF has not and cannot defeat Hamas in Gaza. What does all this tell you? Is this a recipe for starting another war?
Well, I think it's a recipe for the disintegration of the Israeli state. That's my own view. And I think the religious leadership in Israel, there are large numbers of prominent rabbis who have reinforced Netanyahu's message, which you've also heard from people like Ben-Gvir. And that is that they're dealing with the Amalek, animals that deserve the worst, and that anything you do to the animals that are in front of you is justified. So the notion of any sort of moral restraint is completely absent. And that's a strong view, widely shared inside the Israeli population. I'm sure you saw the polling that was on an Israeli television channel, where more than 47% of the population felt that rape and torture and murder and so forth of Palestinian prisoners was justified. So I think there's deep-seated irrational hatred. It's been unleashed, and it permeates the atmosphere in Israel. It's very sad, but it's true. And that's not going to go away quickly. The only way to deal with that is to confront it directly. But we're not going to do that. Our government will not confront it. They may say something in private, but from the standpoint of the current leadership in Israel, they know they exert infinitely more influence and control over the Senate and the House in the United States than President Biden, or for that matter, President Harris does.
The Israeli finance minister, Smotrich, one of the right-wing members of Prime Minister Netanyahu's cabinet and coalition, stated publicly that the best thing to do would be simply to starve the 2 million residents of Gaza, but he's not sure the world would let them get away with that. Hard to imagine a public official saying something like that in public and suggesting it's somehow consistent with international law. I guess that means Israel has its own laws unique to itself and its own standards unique to itself.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you need to take that into account. Their view of what is right and wrong is by no means the same as ours. The last time we saw something like this, it was Yagoda in the Ukraine, where they systematically starved millions of Ukrainians to death. Those they could not shoot or deport were simply allowed to starve and die. And of course, they committed the same kinds of horrendous acts against the population because the Soviets recruited criminals from the prisons under the control of the NKVD, led by Yagoda in Ukraine, to execute the atrocities. That wasn't the only place. They had already starved 2 or 3 million people at a time in various parts of Russia, Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, so forth. So these things have happened before. They didn't get much attention in the West because we didn't have much access to the information. And there were people in the West that were pro-communist and didn't want that information to get out. Right now, I'm rather surprised that we're hearing these things coming out of Israel, because that suggests that the press, which is almost universally behind Israel, even if they don't like what they do, is allowing these leaks to occur somehow.
Tell me, Colonel, about Russian technical support for Iran, anticipating a conflagration between Iran and Israel.
Well, as you pointed out earlier,